Hello there. So this one is called Time, Silence and Freedom. And let's see where we go with all this. It's been sparked off by a present I received from my sister-in-law for my birthday, and she lives in Corsica. And I'll tell you a tiny little bit about her. So she lives in land which is her own, and she lives in her own home, which effectively is 3 floors, just one room on each floor. The downstairs is like storage and the washing space. The living space is in the next one up, and the bedroom is on the top. And it's completely off-grid. It's always been off-grid. There's never been any grid attached to it in any way, shape or form. And when she wants water, she gets the water which comes out of a pipe which is laid into the river. And when she wants to wash, she's got a waterfall which she can go into. And when she needs to go to the toilet, she takes a pickaxe and she uses the pickaxe to dig a hole in the ground, because the ground is very hard because it's a dry island. And she goes to the toilet. So really more off-grid than most people can even conceive of. So never mind about solar panels or any of that. Candles, oil lamp, very simple life. And she lives there with her cats and with either a donkey or a horse, depending on what year it happens to be, what's going on in her life. And so she sent me this book, and it's called A Book of Silence, and it's by someone called Sarah Maitland, and it's an English woman who wrote this book. And as soon as I looked at it, I had this irreverent thought, which is, if it's a book of silence, I'll open up the book and all the pages will be blank, won't they? Well, of course it isn't. And then I felt like being a bit more irreverent. I thought, well, all the pages could be black, so you couldn't write on them, be even better. But it's not. It's a normal book with words in, and yet it's really brought something together for me. And it reminds me very much of when I was in London working as a medical scientific officer. Can hardly even say the words these days. Medical scientific officer in medical pathology in a hospital. And I used to catch the tube to work, what people call the underground, change at Piccadilly Circus. One of the many hundreds of thousands of times I did this, and I did the change. And this guy with a beard walks up to me, and he's got these photocopied pieces of paper in his hand, and he holds it up to me, and I give him the money, and I take the sheet of paper, and I read it in the tube as I'm on my next leg of the journey, and I'm instantly fascinated. And for the duration I continued to live in London, it was actually fixed up in the toilet of my flat, so anyone who ever went to my toilet would have seen these words. And it's called "The Clock is a Tyrant," and it's a picture of an alarm clock ringing and jangling, and he goes on to explain how people's lives are controlled by this concept that we call linear time. So much control. And in fact, people literally are tyrannized by clocks. And of course, if anyone's ever had to catch a bus or a train, we know what that's like if you feel a little bit late. But it goes much deeper, and it penetrates and it ramifies into the whole structure of our society. So even the person who never took a bus or a train in their life is still very much enslaved by time, because let's face it, all work has a start time and an end time. Well, not quite, actually, no. People who are self-employed may not need to have those parameters imposed upon them, but everybody else does. And of course, school is the way that we all get indoctrinated or domesticated into this sense of clock time. And indeed, a parent's life is one of being enslaved to the clock, so the child doesn't get into trouble. It starts as basically and as obviously and as horribly as that, and it goes on. And I know that one of the things that characterises my life as being very different from most people's lives is I've managed to keep a long distance away from clocks for most of my daily life. And there's been an irony about this, because when I host retreats it's like I'm very much on the clock time there. And in fact, I'm on the calendar time at first as I'm counting down the months and then the weeks, and eventually the week's going to turn into days and into hours. So there's something about that, because it has to start at a certain time because the venue is booked, and it has to finish at a certain time for exactly the same reason. But as soon as we're outside of those parameters, the whole point about the retreat is to experience being outside of linear time, outside of clock time. And this is of course because what plant medicines do is they literally break that connection. And I would say one of the fundamentals about working with plant medicines, mushrooms or whatever, it's about reaching a point where boundaries dissolve and we are in oneness. And so time and perceptions of time disappear. And anyone who's ever had any what people call recreational experience with any kind of a plant like cannabis instantly know about time distortion, time dilation effects, whereby a period of time in the influence of that particular medicine might seem to be like endless, and then the person looks at the clock, oh, only such and such has gone by. And there's a particular derivative of the brown plant medicine which is called dimethyltryptamine, and there's also another one which is called Salvia divinorum, and those are extracts, not the whole plant. And so when people work with those, what they find is they can have an experience which might literally be like endless, and then when the whole thing does come to a conclusion, they look at the clock time, well, they've got a person who's the sitter and they says, oh, actually 8 minutes has elapsed. These are wonderful experiences because it starts to break things down. And what I'm realizing from reading the book about silence is that actually all these retreats, all these plant medicine experiences are actually shortcuts when people live such enslaved lives in terms of being beholden to clock time, that when they come on the retreat they can have that sense of oneness, that sense of timelessness, that sense of being outside the space-time continuum, outside of the 3D construct. And indeed, if we are in our progress from 3D to 5D, this is actually becoming more and more significant for all of us. And one of the things that really helps, I find, is to start to pay attention to the really little moments in life. Sometimes I just sit down under an ash tree and I look at a flower, or I notice the drops of dew on the grass, and I'm transported into delight, into joy, into wonder. So this is a great gift. Anyone who's an INFJ, and that's what I am in terms of the 16 personality types of the Myers-Briggs, extroverted sensing, if you allow your senses to extend out and beyond yourself into your immediate environment, that is a great way to harvest wonderful moments of joy as we appreciate little things in life. And one of my favourite films is called American Beauty, and one of the most beautiful moments in the films is not any of the women or any of the men, it's simply a plastic bag being blown by the wind in a derelict urban area. And it's spellbinding because as the cinematography is so good and the use of sound, everything is so utterly cooperative, and the viewer becomes entranced by the movements of the bag, by the eddies and the currents of the wind, with the really stark industrial background. So tuning into these little moments is one of the ways that you step into freedom. So what I'm saying is as follows: when we let go of our enslavement to clock time, all sorts of wonderful opportunities open up to us. And by embracing the silence and being still within and very much aware of our environment, that's when the real magic can happen, and we can step into an endless series of glorious moments of freedom. And that's what these plant medicine experiences are all about, whether they're done in a retreat format or done on your own in silence, whatever format it might happen to be that you go for. That's what you're actually doing, is you're having an opportunity to taste silence. and all the mystery and the magic and the marvels that accrue from such experiences. And this is why so many people who've developed their spiritual abilities do eventually go on silent retreats, or go into silence, or choose to live on their own. This is all part of tapping into something joyous and wondrous. And one of the most extreme examples is people who get on boats and circumnavigate the globe. They're likely to be in their boat for more than a year in a situation like that, and when they cut themselves off from everything that they're familiar with, utterly miraculous things do happen to them. So thank you very much for joining with me on my exploration of time, silence and freedom. All the love to you.